We buried Diana, but you buried us. 7 words whispered at a king's coronation, now echoing through a shattered royal bloodline. On the very day King Charles took the throne, a private moment between Prince William and Prince Harry detonated years of buried emotion. In front of ancient walls and global cameras, William's cold, cutting sentence hit harder than any royal scandal in decades. What drove the future king to say such words? What did Harry do next? And how did this private exchange change everything we thought we knew about Diana's sons? Stay with us, because what happened behind those cathedral doors is more shocking and more personal than you've ever been told. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The golden carriages rolled through the streets of London, polished to a mirror's shine. Trumpets echoed from the stone walls of Westminster Abbey. An age-old tradition was being reborn before a global audience of millions as King Charles III, the eldest son of Queen Elizabeth II, finally took his place upon the throne. Yet behind the regal spectacle and centuries-old ceremony, something far more raw, far more human, quietly unraveled in the shadows of the grandeur. It wasn't broadcast live on BBC or Sky News. It wasn't captured in the overhead drone shots or the rehearsed camera pans across royal faces framed in solemn dignity. It happened in a moment so fleeting that many believed it had been missed entirely. But those close enough to the inner circle, those stationed behind marble columns, those reading lips from yards away, those trusted with the ears of palace aides, say they heard it. 7 words. Delivered not with fury, not with volume, but with surgical precision, a kind of emotional scalpel cutting deeper than any royal tabloid scandal ever could. We buried Diana, but you buried us. Prince William, heir to the throne, future King of England, uttered the words with a measured tone, but a gaze heavy enough to crush stone. He wasn't facing cameras. He wasn't delivering a speech. He was speaking directly to his younger brother, Prince Harry, once his partner in grief, his ally against the institution that devoured their mother. But now, here they stood, years apart in every sense, physically side by side at the coronation, emotionally worlds apart. There were whispers before, speculation, rumors of resentment, reports of fraternal tension that had bubbled over during the infamous Sandringham summit. The Oprah interview, the Netflix docuseries, the memoir titled Spare, each had laid down a brick in the wall dividing them. But until now, there had been no quote that defined the fracture. No line that could be etched into the cultural memory the way Diana's death had been. Until now. What William meant wasn't just personal, it was generational. We buried Diana. The boys had stood shoulder to shoulder behind her coffin as the world watched them walk the most painful steps of their lives. That image, 2 young sons robbed of their mother, performing duty amid tragedy, defined a decade of British mourning. It captured a nation's heartbreak. But the second half of the sentence, "but you buried us," wasn't just a lament. It was an accusation, a revelation of betrayal, a statement of finality. The coronation was supposed to be the moment the House of Windsor turned the page, a time of unity, of renewal. But instead, it exposed a deeper crack beneath the surface, one that no amount of gold leaf or royal protocol could hide. Why did William say what he did? What brought the future king to such a devastating line? And more importantly, how did Harry react when his brother, in that sacred cathedral and under the eyes of God, stripped away every layer of royal politeness and laid bare the wound neither of them had truly healed? To understand the gravity of that sentence, you have to understand what these brothers once were, what they became, and what they may never be again. This story isn't just about 2 royal siblings. It's about how grief metastasizes into silence, how duty can replace intimacy, how love between brothers, once forged in shared pain, can dissolve into bitter estrangement under the weight of secrets, cameras, and global scrutiny. This is a story that begins in mourning and ends in confrontation. It is the reckoning of 2 men whose lives were scripted from birth, but whose hearts, like all of ours, still break without permission. On May 6, 2023, King Charles III received the crown. But on that same day, another kind of coronation unfolded in the quiet glances exchanged between his sons, a crowning moment of truth, when William spoke not as prince or heir, but as a brother left behind. This video dives deep into that moment, peeling back the regal facade to explore the pain behind the crown. We'll explore not only the words William said, but the history, heartbreak, and hidden dynamics that made them inevitable. We'll walk through the corridors of royal memory, from Kensington Palace to Montecito, examining the ghosts that haunt the Wales brothers, and the choices that led to this emotional breaking point. And if you think this is just another tale of sibling rivalry, think again. This is about legacy, about memory, about what it means to survive trauma when you're never allowed to show the scars, about how losing your mother can bond you, and how that same loss can, over time, pull you apart. In the hours leading up to the coronation, the palace buzzed with the usual tension that comes with royal events. Coordinated timelines, press embargoes, security rotations. But there was also the quiet anticipation of a moment long in the making. Everyone knew Harry would attend. Everyone knew William would have to see him. The tabloids speculated endlessly about whether they would shake hands, smile, or sit apart. What no one anticipated was the emotional powder keg building beneath the surface of that carefully curated day. Harry arrived without Meghan. She had chosen to remain in California with their children, a decision that only amplified public chatter. Was she snubbing the royal family? Was she protecting herself from media attack? Was she distancing herself from further confrontation? William arrived as the firstborn son, the elder statesman of the new royal era. His wife, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was poised and immaculate. Their children, including young George who would play a role in the ceremony, followed royal protocol with military precision. It was, on the surface, a picture of continuity and control. And yet the cameras caught the split seconds where William's smile didn't reach his eyes, where Harry's body turned slightly away, where, even in their proximity, there was a vacuum of warmth. Then came the alleged moment, after the ceremony, during the recessional or perhaps even just outside the Abbey gates. There was no microphone, no official transcript, just a few words exchanged when the brothers were briefly alone, or as alone as they could be under royal watch. The aide who first leaked the quote described it as a whisper loud enough to rupture history. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't meant for press. But it was heard. "We buried Diana, but you buried us." Whether it was said with venom or sorrow is still up for debate. Some say William's eyes glistened. Others insist his voice was steady, rehearsed, maybe even long planned. But everyone agrees it was intentional. It was meant to be heard. And it was meant to cut. What exactly had Harry buried? The family? The monarchy? Their bond? Perhaps all three. This wasn't just a private feud brought into public light. It was a generational wound split open in real time, as if Diana herself had returned in spirit to witness the implosion of everything she had once held dear. Her sons were no longer protectors of her memory together. They were rivals, each convinced they were honoring her in their own way. And William, who had carried the crown of responsibility for so long, had clearly reached a breaking point. The story we're about to unfold isn't neatly resolved. There's no tidy ending or royal photo op to tie things up. What we're left with is a sentence, a haunting sentence, that will now echo through every future royal event, every family gathering, every book or interview either brother grants from now on. It may go down as the most emotionally charged line spoken by a member of the royal family in the modern era. Not delivered to a camera, not printed in a memoir, but whispered between blood. Over the next chapters, we'll take you deeper into the meaning behind those words. We'll uncover the full history of William and Harry's fracture. We'll examine the pressures, betrayals, and cultural shifts that brought them to this point. We'll revisit Diana's legacy, Charles's inaction, Camilla's influence, and the institution that both protected and poisoned the brothers' bond. This isn't just another royal drama. This is a reckoning. And it starts with a sentence that, once spoken, could never be taken back. They were the sons of a king before he ever wore a crown. From the moment they were born, Prince William and Prince Harry were symbols of continuity in a monarchy defined by centuries of tradition. But behind the titles and royal duties were two boys who once shared the same bedtime stories, who climbed the same palace staircases, and who grieved the same devastating loss. Their childhoods, though laced with privilege, were also deeply shaped by trauma and emotional upheaval that no amount of royal training could prepare them for. To understand how 7 words could rupture the very core of their relationship, we must travel back in time, before the scandals, before the public feuds, to the days when Diana, Princess of Wales, held their small hands and whispered to them not as royals, but as her boys. William Arthur Philip Lewis, born June 21, 1982, arrived to a world that saw him as the future king. He was immediately the subject of headlines, of national excitement, of royal obligation projected into a future that would not arrive for decades. But to Diana, he was simply Will's, her beloved firstborn, a child she shielded with fierce maternal instinct from the machinery of monarchy. Then came Prince Henry Charles Albert David, known simply as Harry, on September 15, 1984. With his birth, the so-called spare joined the heir. And for a time, the Wales family appeared united. Charles had his succession secured. Diana had her boys. And Britain had its fairy tale. Two brothers growing up together in the gleam of royal spotlight, often smiling, always side by side. But the fairy tale, as history has since proven, was never built to last. By the early 1990s, the cracks in Charles and Diana's marriage had become chasms. The press caught wind of affairs, of icy silences during public events, of body language that betrayed a love long gone. But while the adults fought behind palace walls, the children found solace in each other. William, older by just over 2 years, often took on the role of protector. He was known to comfort Harry when Diana cried. He would try to distract him when arguments between their parents escalated. And when the media became relentless, chasing their mother, hounding their family, it was William who would draw the curtains and attempt to create a cocoon of calm for Harry inside their home. Their bond was not just emotional, it was strategic. Together, they were navigating the minefield of royal life while watching their mother suffer publicly and privately. Diana, who famously stated that she wanted her sons to grow up with a sense of normalcy, would take them to amusement parks, to McDonald's, to homeless shelters. They were educated in empathy before diplomacy, in emotion before tradition. And Diana was the architect of that approach. She often told friends that William was more serious, more aware of his destiny, while Harry was more carefree, more mischievous. But she never wanted their roles, heir and spare, to define their worth. Instead, she urged them to be equals in heart, to support one another through the whirlwind life they'd inherited. Then, on August 31st, 1997, everything changed. The car crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris didn't just kill Diana. It shattered the boys' foundation. They were only 15 and 12 years old when they received the news that would redefine their existence forever. In that moment, the protective embrace of their mother was gone, and in her place stood a crown, cold, demanding, and incapable of mourning like a human being. The image of William and Harry walking behind Diana's casket is etched into the memory of a generation. Dressed in black, their faces solemn, they marched through the streets of London not as children processing grief, but as public figures required to perform stoicism. Millions watched them. Millions wept for them. And yet, they were expected to do what few boys could: remain composed while the world dissected their mother's final moments. It was said that Prince Philip, their grandfather, walked with them to lend strength. But it was William and Harry who leaned on each other. Behind the cameras, in the silence of Kensington Palace, their grief ran deeper than public mourning ever could. And it was during these years, those raw, formative years, that their brotherhood cemented itself as a kind of refuge. In the years that followed, the brothers grew into young men under the watchful gaze of the monarchy. William pursued academics and royal duties, attending Eton and later the University of St. Andrews, where he met his future wife, Catherine Middleton. Harry took a different path, embracing military service and finding structure and purpose in the armed forces. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan and became known for his passion for veteran support. Still, through it all, they remained close, often joking in interviews, always defending each other in public. And when William married Kate in 2011, Harry was right beside him, his best man, his brother. But even then, subtle changes were brewing. William's increasing responsibilities within the royal institution meant he had to adopt a more formal role. He had a wife, then children, and was being groomed as the direct heir after Charles. He began to internalize the need for protocol, for silence, for sacrificing personal discomfort for the sake of the crown. Harry, meanwhile, though dutiful, was growing restless with the limitations imposed by the royal machine. The differences became more pronounced when Meghan Markle entered the scene. The American actress brought with her a different energy, bold, modern, outspoken, and it resonated with Harry. She wasn't born into royalty. She didn't accept the palace rules without question. And Harry, still grieving a mother he felt had been failed by the institution, found in Meghan someone who offered love without pretense, loyalty without condition. Initially, William welcomed Meghan. There are accounts of him being warm, gracious. But as things moved quickly between the couple, William reportedly expressed concern, not out of malice, but out of brotherly caution. That conversation, which Harry described in later interviews as more critical than caring, marked a turning point. From that point on, the divide grew. The so-called Fab Four era, where William, Kate, Harry, and Meghan appeared to be a dream team of royal progress, was short-lived. Behind the scenes, tensions brewed. Press coverage turned toxic. Meghan became the target of relentless scrutiny, much of it laced with racism and misogyny. Harry felt the palace didn't do enough to protect her. William, bound by his role and the need to maintain media relationships, didn't step in the way Harry hoped he would. And that's when the unspoken bond between the brothers began to crack. The years that followed, 2019 to 2023, were marked by seismic shifts. Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties, moved to North America, gave an explosive interview with Oprah Winfrey where they spoke of mental health struggles, alleged racism within the royal household, and feelings of abandonment. For William, those words weren't just hurtful, they were perceived as betrayal. He had spent his entire adult life holding the line, playing the part, sacrificing openness for duty. And here was his brother, blowing the lid off everything in front of the world. In private, aides described William as incandescent with rage. He felt the institution his mother had died trying to navigate was now being attacked from within, by family. But perhaps the most painful element for William wasn't the critique of the monarchy. It was that the one person who was supposed to stand beside him, no matter the circumstance, his brother, had walked away. By the time of Queen Elizabeth II's passing in September 2022, the fracture had become a chasm. The brothers reunited only briefly during the mourning period. They walked side by side once again during the Queen's funeral procession. The images were reminiscent of Diana's funeral. But the emotional undercurrent was entirely different. The weight of unspoken words, of unresolved pain, lingered like a fog between them. Polite nods. Stiff body language. No eye contact. The unity of grief had become a mere performance. And so, when the coronation of King Charles III arrived, the question loomed large. Would this be the moment of reconciliation, or would the gap widen permanently? William had spent his life preparing for this, his father's ascension, his own role as the next in line, the continuation of the Windsor legacy. Harry's attendance was a reluctant nod to tradition. But emotionally, the two were no longer on parallel paths. The 7 words William would later utter, "We buried Diana, but you buried us," weren't said in a vacuum. They were the culmination of decades, of shared trauma, of diverging values, of love lost to silence and trust corroded by choices. In those words lived the echoes of a bond once unbreakable, now strained to the brink. And in the following scene, we step into the very moment that sentence was spoken. The exact hour, the setting, the witnesses, and the aftershock that continues to reverberate through the House of Windsor. The skies above London were leaden, a thick gray canvas hanging low as though even the heavens were burdened by the weight of the day. May 6, 2023, Coronation Day, was not just another ceremonial affair. It marked the formal crowning of King Charles III, a moment 74 years in the making. But for those paying close attention, it wasn't only about a monarch's ascension. Beneath the royal procession, the carriages, the trumpets, and the velvet-draped thrones, there was another drama unfolding quieter, more intimate, and infinitely more tragic. 2 brothers, once inseparable, stood yards apart in a cathedral built to honor unity in God. One was draped in the vestiges of duty. The other, cloaked in emotional exile. Their eyes met only fleetingly. Their gestures spoke more in avoidance than acknowledgement. This wasn't just a family event. It was a battlefield camouflaged in gold. Prince William, as expected, arrived in regal form. Every movement of his was choreographed for legacy. From the moment he stepped out of his convoy at Westminster Abbey, his posture was that of a man not only standing as the heir to the throne, but someone firmly aware of his responsibilities as a stabilizing force for the monarchy. His military regalia was pristine, his expression controlled. He moved with the grace of someone who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. Behind him walked Catherine, Princess of Wales, elegant, staid. But even the most polished veneer cannot completely hide what exists beneath. Observers noted that William's smile lacked the warmth he once easily shared with the crowds. His eyes, though poised, seemed weighed down with something heavier than ceremonial gravity. He nodded to the clergy. He acknowledged the choir. But he did not look toward the back, toward the section where his brother, Harry, had quietly taken a seat. Harry's arrival was far less grand. Having chosen not to play a ceremonial role, and with his wife Meghan remaining in California, Harry entered the abbey without the accompaniment of a royal entourage. No formal robes, no ornate medals, just a sharp morning suit and a faint trace of visible discomfort. He knew, as did everyone in that space, that he was both part of the family and not a royal without a role. A guest at his own bloodline's centerpiece event. His placement was symbolic. He wasn't seated near the immediate royal family, nor was he exiled to the back rows. Instead, he occupied a middle ground, just enough to be seen, not enough to belong. To the left of him sat Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, the daughters of Prince Andrew, who had themselves fallen out of royal favor in various ways. In many ways, Harry had become part of the misfit branch of the Windsor tree. Yet if he felt wounded by the protocol, he didn't show it, at least not in overt displays. His face remained mostly neutral, but close-up shots captured moments of visible strain, tightening of the jaw, furrowed brows, the kind of small muscle movements that betray inner turmoil. Palace insiders later confirmed what many suspected. Harry had arrived with minimal advance notice. There were logistical arrangements, but emotionally, his presence was a variable no one could completely account for. William, according to sources, was informed of Harry's attendance but not consulted. The lack of a phone call or a private moment before the coronation only exacerbated tensions. The two did not exchange greetings before the ceremony. No handshake, no nod, not even a glance captured on camera. As King Charles was being crowned just meters away from his sons, the brothers remained statues of civility, separate, guarded, and unyielding. But observers familiar with royal micro-expressions, and even lip readers hired by media outlets to analyze the day, noticed subtle exchanges. At one point, William turned his head slightly during the litany of prayers. His eyes passed in Harry's direction. He said nothing aloud, but his lips moved, barely perceptible. The phrase, as later revealed through multiple sources, was a short sentence directed at Harry. "We buried Diana, but you buried us." The moment didn't disrupt the ceremony. There was no audible gasp, no reaction from the clergy, no indication that the audience at large had noticed. But the sentence, 7 words delivered with the force of decades of pain, landed like a stone dropped in a still lake. Harry reportedly remained unmoved. His gaze did not shift. His expression did not betray recognition. But to those seated within proximity, the shift in atmosphere was tangible. A chill, a fracture that had just deepened. The question lingered like incense in the cathedral air. What made William choose that moment to deliver such a sentence? Was it the weight of the day itself? A cathartic release after years of silence? Or was it a calculated declaration, a final severing of the emotional tether between them? The coronation ceremony continued, grand and solemn. King Charles accepted the crown placed upon his head by the Archbishop of Canterbury. Trumpets sounded. Cannons roared across Hyde Park. But for two brothers, this was not a moment of shared triumph. It was a painful reminder of what had been lost. As the new king processed down the nave, flanked by religious leaders and members of the armed forces, William fell in line with practiced ease. He knelt. He pledged loyalty to his father. His voice echoed through the abbey, a formal commitment to serve the crown. Meanwhile, Harry remained seated, silent. He did not kneel. He did not speak. Outside the abbey, as the royal procession prepared to return to Buckingham Palace, the crowds cheered. The carriages sparkled in the spring light. Yet behind the facade, tension brewed. It was after the ceremony, in one of the private transitional rooms of Westminster Abbey, used historically for quick refreshments and regathering, that the second pivotal moment occurred. Witnesses claim William and Harry briefly shared the same space. There were a few members of the clergy present, and perhaps a royal aide or two. The room was relatively quiet, enough to speak freely. It is in this moment that William is believed to have repeated the sentence, or perhaps said it in fuller voice. "We buried Diana, but you buried us." No one responded. Harry turned slightly. He did not reply. An aide handed him his coat. William adjusted his cuffs. The silence in that room was more eloquent than any argument. What followed was the image of Harry exiting the abbey alone. He did not appear on the Buckingham Palace balcony. He did not stay for the royal lunch. Within hours, he was seen at Heathrow Airport, boarding a flight back to California. His return to the United States was so swift that many speculated whether his attendance had been emotionally unbearable. William, by contrast, remained visible. He joined Charles, Camilla, and the other senior royals for the traditional balcony appearance. He waved. He smiled. But his interactions were limited, and he was notably more subdued than previous royal appearances. Later that day, a palace source would describe him as calm, but resolved. There was no sign of regret. For the public, what was captured on camera was the surface, a coronation celebrated in pageantry and tradition. For those inside, what they witnessed was the implosion of what was once the firmest bond in the royal family. Royal commentators rushed to interpret the events. Some believed William had reached an emotional tipping point, where the weight of Harry's public accusations and memoir revelations could no longer be ignored. Others saw it as a form of closure, William drawing a line not just emotionally but morally, declaring that whatever bond they once shared had been broken by choice, not fate. Many royal watchers noted the bitter irony. The very institution that had cost them their mother now stood between them again, this time with no one left to bridge the divide. In many ways, this coronation did not unite the royal family, it solidified the separation. What was once a silent divide now had language. 7 words. Delivered quietly, but heard around the world. Not as a declaration of war. Not as a plea for reconciliation. But as a final acknowledgement of a wound too deep to hide. In the next scene, we'll explore those 7 words in detail. We'll break down each phrase, decode the emotional intent, and uncover why this simple sentence holds the weight of 2 lifetimes, and perhaps the collapse of a legacy built not just on tradition, but on brotherhood. There are moments in history when a few simple words take on the power of thunder. Not because they're screamed, not because they echo across halls, but because of the weight they carry. Words that don't just land, they settle into the bones of everyone who hears them. And for the British royal family, and for the millions watching from afar, one such moment was born inside the hallowed walls of Westminster Abbey. We buried Diana, but you buried us. 7 words. Not shouted. Not amplified. Delivered quietly, perhaps even instinctively, but instantly unforgettable. What made this moment so monumental was not simply the words themselves, but the context, the timing, and the man who said them. Prince William, the stoic, measured, publicly disciplined future king, has rarely, if ever, allowed emotion to spill into the public eye. And yet, in this sacred place, surrounded by centuries of tradition, military precision, and the symbolism of British continuity, he turned and said something that pierced through all that ceremonial armor. It wasn't a statement for cameras. It wasn't a political message. It was a human eruption, born of grief, frustration, and betrayal. The sentence was heard by only a few within the abbey. Some were stunned into silence. Others pretended not to hear, adhering to the royal etiquette of discretion at all costs. But those 7 words would not stay secret for long. Within 24 hours, palace insiders had leaked them to trusted royal correspondents. And by the next news cycle, they had spread like wildfire across media outlets, tabloids, and social media. Why did this sentence land with such force? Because in that instant, the royal family's carefully curated image of controlled reconciliation, of silent endurance, of dignified distance, was shattered by something raw and real. It wasn't a press release. It wasn't a leaked email. It wasn't a ghostwritten memoir. It was one man turning to his brother and saying the one thing that couldn't be unsaid. To understand just how deep these words cut, we must break them down, not as a publicist might, but as 2 brothers would. Not as royals, but as sons. We buried Diana. This opening phrase is more than a shared memory. It's a bond sealed in trauma. The funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales, wasn't just a national tragedy, it was a family fracture. Millions watched William and Harry, just 15 and 12, walk behind their mother's coffin through London. That image became the defining photograph of royal loss in modern times. 2 boys, grieving in public, held together only by their own determination and each other's presence. By saying, "We buried Diana," William evokes that moment. A time when they were still united, still brothers in the truest sense. He's reminding Harry of what they went through together. It's a shared scar, a memory that's supposed to transcend all else. But then comes the turn. "But you buried us." This is not about death. It's about destruction. A different kind. Emotional. Relational. Symbolic. In these words, William accuses Harry not of merely leaving the royal family, but of destroying the very thing that once bonded them. Their unity. Their brotherhood. Perhaps even their shared sense of purpose within the family. This is more than anger. It's grief reimagined. In William's mind, Diana's death was a wound they survived together. But what Harry has done in the years since, through interviews, memoirs, and public disclosures, is the burial of something more personal: trust. When Harry and Meghan left the royal family, it was unprecedented. Not in its logistics, royals had stepped back before, but in the manner of their departure. The public airing of grievances, the accusations of racism, the implication that the institution itself was emotionally abusive. All of this, in William's view, didn't just attack the monarchy. It attacked their shared legacy. To William, the notion that his brother could speak so openly about private family matters in forums like Oprah Winfrey's interview or the Netflix documentary felt like a betrayal of everything they had endured together. And perhaps more than that, it felt like Harry had taken their mother's memory and weaponized it for his own narrative. By saying, "You buried us," William wasn't speaking about the royal institution as a whole. He was speaking about the two of them. The us in that sentence refers to their bond, their alliance, their ability to trust each other implicitly. It implies that, in Harry's pursuit of freedom or vindication, he killed the last vestige of what once connected them. Some royal historians have compared this to past fractures in monarchic history, like Edward VIII's abdication in 1936, or the fallouts between Queen Elizabeth II and Princess Margaret. But those comparisons miss the deeply emotional layer here. William and Harry weren't just relatives. They were survivors. Survivors of trauma, of loss, of an upbringing under an institution that rarely allowed space for grief or vulnerability. For William to say those words, in that setting, was to acknowledge that the wound between them was not only open, it had become, in his eyes, fatal. It's also important to consider the subtext of the moment. The coronation wasn't just any event. It was the moment their father, long in waiting, finally became king. And yet, amid all the celebration, the real emotional center of the day was missing: Diana. Her absence hung over every photograph. Her memory hovered in every speech. It was impossible not to feel the contrast between what could have been and what was. In that light, William's words take on even more significance. He's not just grieving his mother. He's grieving the version of their family that might have existed had things gone differently. If Diana had lived, if the institution hadn't crushed her spirit, if the brothers had found a way to stay united. Instead, William stood in a sacred hall, watching his father crowned, with the full knowledge that his family, at least the emotional heart of it, was already fractured beyond repair. Some close to the royal household believe this was William's moment of release. Not just a dig, not a petty insult, but the emotional culmination of everything he'd kept bottled inside. Years of watching his brother dismantle their private world in public. Years of holding silence while Harry published stories about palace cruelty, about family indifference. Years of choosing duty over expression. In those 7 words, William may have finally allowed himself to feel. To say out loud what he could not package into protocol or press statements. That he was hurt. That he was betrayed. That something once sacred had been killed, not by paparazzi, not by outsiders, but by his own brother's choices. And how did Harry respond? Eyewitnesses say he remained silent. But silence can speak volumes. Was he stunned? Did he expect it? Or had he already resigned himself to the reality that their relationship was beyond salvage? What's most haunting about this moment is that there were no witnesses who described a follow-up. No attempt at reconciliation. No argument. Just silence. The kind of silence that follows after something has broken and everyone knows it cannot be fixed. In the days that followed, royal media outlets scrambled to validate the quote. Some denied it. Others confirmed it. But the emotional resonance of the sentence had already taken hold. Commentators across Britain debated its meaning. Psychologists were invited on news programs to unpack the emotional trauma at play. Body language experts dissected the clip of William turning his head. Every royal watcher had their take. But the truth remains. This sentence marks a new chapter in the royal saga. One that isn't about thrones or titles, but about brothers lost to time, trauma, and choices that diverged too far to return from. In the next scene, we will go even deeper. Not into the public interpretation, but into the emotional layers embedded in each of those 7 words. What exactly was William accusing Harry of? And is there any path back from such a devastating sentiment? 7 words. Seemingly simple. Structurally straightforward. But once spoken, they carried the emotional weight of decades, and perhaps even generations. We buried Diana, but you buried us. This was not a random outburst. This was a crafted sentence, intentionally weighted, packed with layers of meaning that deserve careful, deliberate unpacking. Each word, each pause, reflects years of sorrow, betrayal, suppressed fury, and broken hopes between two brothers whose lives have been anything but ordinary. Let's begin with the first two words. We buried. That phrase does not begin with I. It begins with we. There is significance in that decision. By choosing we, William wasn't speaking solely as an individual. He was invoking a shared experience, a joint trauma, a moment when the lines of individuality blurred under the crushing force of grief. William was reaching back to the rawest, most intimate chapter in their young lives. When two boys walked side by side behind their mother's coffin as the world watched in silence, that funeral wasn't merely a ceremony. It was a deeply symbolic moment, an attempt by the monarchy to maintain dignity while a mother was being buried and her children were being publicly tested for strength. We buried refers to more than just the act of laying Diana to rest in the literal sense. It encompasses the entire ordeal, the waking nightmare of losing their mother, the forced public composure, the isolation that followed. That phrase unites the brothers in a moment where words had failed them both, and all they had left was each other. But it's the use of the word buried that hits hardest. It's not, we lost, or we grieved. William didn't choose a passive verb. Buried is active. It implies an action done together, an experience that was final, unavoidable, and physically shared. It carries the cold, unchangeable weight of permanence. We buried Diana is a way of saying, we carried the weight. We did what was required. We survived the unspeakable, together. Then comes the pivot. But you. That shift in pronoun marks the start of emotional exile. It is the departure point. But you signals a betrayal of the original unity William invoked at the beginning. It is the fork in the road where the shared becomes separate, where we becomes you. This is the moment the sentence stops being a remembrance and becomes an accusation. You buried us. That is the thunderclap. This is the part that truly devastates. In William's construction, Harry has not just made different life choices. He has committed an act of destruction. The use of the word buried, again, is deliberate. It mirrors the earlier phrase, creating a parallel structure. Diana was buried physically. The bond between the brothers, however, was buried metaphorically. One was inevitable. The other, according to William, was chosen. You buried us suggests not passive distancing, but deliberate dismantling. It implies that Harry's decisions didn't merely cause consequences, they ended something. Ended a bond. Ended trust. Ended the possibility of normalcy ever returning. For William to say this means he is holding Harry solely accountable for the rupture between them. It is, in essence, a statement of condemnation. But let's not overlook the final word. Us. Who is the us that Harry is being accused of burying? It could refer strictly to William and Harry, the fraternal bond that was once forged in fire. The private world they inhabited, one built on trust, on shared trauma, on silent understanding. A world in which they protected each other from the expectations of the monarchy and the predations of the media. That us represented sanctuary. Or, the us might be larger. It might represent the entire family, the institution of the monarchy, the public image of the unbreakable royal siblings. In that interpretation, William is suggesting that Harry's public revelations, his step back from royal duties, his interviews, books, and media appearances, didn't just fracture their private bond. They fractured the image of royal unity itself. There's also a deeper, more emotional interpretation that us refers to the version of themselves Diana had hoped for, the men she wanted them to become. By this reading, William is saying, you didn't just walk away from the family. You walked away from who we were supposed to be. You turned your back on the one thing we had left after losing her, each other. This is an especially cutting interpretation because it positions Harry's choices as a betrayal not only of William, but of Diana's memory. And coming from William, who has always been deeply protective of their mother's legacy, the accusation is searing. Now let's look at the timing. These words were spoken at the coronation of their father, an event meant to symbolize continuity, renewal, and royal strength. That William chose this moment to voice something so painful and raw suggests several things. First, it implies that the coronation, with its grandeur and symbolism, acted as a pressure point. The entire day was a reminder of legacy, of what was lost, what was inherited, and what was expected. Perhaps the presence of Harry at the event triggered in William an emotional overflow. Seeing his brother, who had stepped away from it all, still present at the ceremony of their father's crowning might have pushed him past a limit he'd long been containing. Second, the setting gave the words even more weight. This wasn't said at a private family gathering. It wasn't sent in a text or muttered in passing. It was said, albeit quietly, at the very heart of royal tradition, inside the walls of Westminster Abbey, under the eyes of history. This suggests William wanted it to be heard, remembered, and felt, even if it was only by a few. And then there's the personal context. Leading up to the coronation, William had endured months, if not years, of public silence while Harry's voice echoed across the globe. From the Oprah interview to the Netflix docuseries to the explosive revelations in Spare, William's role had been to absorb the blows without public retaliation. In the monarchy, silence often equals strength. But silence also comes at a cost. Internally, it accumulates. The coronation provided no opportunity for resolution. There were no peace talks, no family dinners, no reconciliation in private. So when William finally spoke those words, it was not an opening to dialogue. It was a punctuation mark, an emotional period placed at the end of a sentence written over 20 years. The gravity of the moment is further amplified by how unroyal it was. Royals are trained to say nothing personal in public, to live behind glass, curated and impenetrable. William broke that unspoken rule. Not with a press release, not with a tell-all, but with a quiet, devastating truth whispered to the only other person who truly knew what it had been like to lose their mother and keep living as if nothing had changed. That, perhaps, is the deepest tragedy. These words weren't uttered out of hate. They were born from pain. Pain that never got spoken. Pain that was deferred for the sake of duty. Pain that grew into resentment as Harry found a way out, and William felt left behind, still trapped in the gilded cage. It's the kind of pain that can turn into bitterness when there is no path to healing. William may have believed that, for all their differences, Harry would always return to the center. That no matter the distance or disagreements, the shared loss of their mother would keep them tethered. But when that bond appeared finally severed, when Harry chose autonomy over allegiance, William may have felt as if Harry had not only left the family but buried the last trace of their shared past. And so, "We buried Diana, but you buried us," becomes more than a sentence. It becomes a requiem. For the boys they were. For the future they imagined. For the trust they once held. It is the final word of a story not finished, but fractured. In the next scene, we'll examine Harry's reaction in deeper detail. Was his silence truly acceptance? Or was there more beneath the surface than anyone realized? What was going through his mind in that moment? And what has followed since the world first learned of the words that may have ended a royal relationship forever? It was a moment as brief as a breath, but the world is still holding on to it. The day was already heavy, laden with symbolism, ancestral legacy, and carefully scripted protocol, but for Prince Harry, it carried a weight far beyond crowns and pageantry. It was the first time he'd returned to such a central royal event since severing ties with the firm. And it was the first time he stood physically near his brother after years of silence, slander, and sorrow. When Prince William, with almost chilling calm, said the now infamous words, "We buried Diana, but you buried us," the air changed. But what changed within Harry? On the outside, Harry gave nothing away. No flinch. No gasp. No flash of anger or regret. He barely moved at all. But for those who followed his emotional arc, from the haunted boy walking behind his mother's coffin, to the soldier, to the Duke of Sussex who stood up against the monarchy, his silence was more than it appeared. It was a response, shaped not in seconds but in years. Let's go back to that exact moment again. According to eyewitness accounts, Harry had just taken a step toward the Abbey's exit after the ceremony. It was then, in a semi-private corridor, that William spoke. His voice low, his words few, but deliberate. Whether Harry anticipated it or not, we may never fully know. But his body language told a different story from his face. He didn't speak. He didn't turn away. Instead, he stood motionless for a moment longer than necessary. Not frozen, but bracing. Some who were nearby described Harry's demeanor as tight. Not defensive, but restrained. Others say there was the subtlest of changes in his expression, a soft clench of the jaw, a narrowing of the eyes, indicating he had heard, absorbed, and stored the statement like one would a coded threat. Why didn't he say anything? The first and perhaps simplest reason is self-preservation. Harry has become acutely aware of how any reaction, any word, any glance can be magnified, misinterpreted, or twisted into tabloid headlines. He knew the setting. He knew the stakes. A heated response, or even a visible one, would have stolen the coronation's thunder and placed him at the center of yet another firestorm. His silence, then, could have been a calculated shield, But silence doesn't equal peace. Behind the composed exterior, Harry may have been roiling. For years, he had been publicly pushing back against the institution that raised him, the press that pursued him, and the family that, in his eyes, failed him. In Oprah's garden, in the pages of his memoir Spare, in the Netflix docuseries that peeled back layers of palace mystique, Harry had found his voice. He had told his side. He had laid bare his wounds. And yet, in this moment, all that narrative, all that exposure, had been boiled down into a 7-word indictment from the one person whose opinion likely still mattered most. It's a cruel paradox. After all the public speaking, all the carefully chosen confessions, the only words that hit hardest came not from an interviewer, or the Queen, or even his father, but from his brother. To be accused of burying us was not just a call-out. It was an emotional disownment. For Harry, who had once believed that breaking away from royal life was an act of survival, for his marriage, his children, his mental health, those words may have landed as a betrayal of his truth. He hadn't buried them. He had escaped what he believed was a trap of silence, image control, and emotional repression. In his mind, he didn't destroy anything. He tried to salvage himself. But perception is everything in a family governed by ritual and roles. And to William, who stayed, who bore the weight of duty, and who never had the luxury to rewrite his role, Harry's departure wasn't liberation, it was desertion. So in that silent moment, Harry was confronted not just by William's words, but by the emotional chasm between them. Two sons of the same mother, shaped by the same tragedy, now seeing each other as the source of a second heartbreak. Privately, aides say that Harry remained subdued for the remainder of his brief visit. He left immediately after the ceremony, skipping the palace reception and flying back to California within hours. To the public, it was framed as a scheduling necessity. He needed to return home for his son Archie's birthday. But behind closed doors, the hasty departure reeked of discomfort. Sources close to Harry admitted that he felt ambushed by the exchange. Not because the words were loud, but because of their timing, their intimacy, and their finality. This wasn't a royal statement. It was personal. Deeply so. In interviews following the coronation, Harry made no reference to the sentence. He didn't allude to it. He didn't offer interpretations. That, in itself, is revealing. He chose not to refute it, not to defend himself, not to add a counter-narrative. And for a man who had spent years telling his story, that decision is striking. Perhaps he felt that no reply could do justice to the complexity of what was said. Or perhaps he knew that anything he said would only reignite a media frenzy, pulling the focus away from his father's moment and throwing the entire monarchy back into chaos. But another possibility is more haunting. Maybe he didn't respond because there was nothing left to say. There comes a point in some family fractures where explanations run dry, where every memory has been weaponized, every grievance aired, and every path back home feels burned. For Harry, this may have been that point. The moment when he understood that the brother he once shared everything with now saw him not just as an outsider, but as a destroyer. And what does that do to someone like Harry? Here is a man who spent his entire life being the spare, always in the shadow of the heir, always less restrained, more emotional, more impulsive. He spent years carving an identity out of that second-place status, first through rebellion, then through service, then through storytelling. But at the core, he always craved connection. And if William was the institution's favorite, he was Diana's firebrand, the one who cried, who laughed too loud, who loved deeply. Now, even that part of him had been framed as damaging. We buried Diana, but you buried us. It's more than a sentence. It's a rewriting of their entire relationship. From shared victims to divided adversaries. From teammates to witnesses standing on opposite sides of a battlefield neither ever wanted to enter. And what about Meghan? Though she was not at the coronation, reports suggest that she was closely monitoring from home. Friends say she was supportive but furious. Furious not just at the statement, but at the idea that it could have been said in a moment meant to honor her husband's late mother. To her, the line was not just hurtful, it was manipulative, meant to cast Harry as the villain in a story where everyone had played a role in the downfall. Whether Meghan encouraged Harry to let it go or to fight back is unknown. But what is certain is that the statement would echo in their home for days to come. Some psychologists who specialize in sibling estrangement have noted that silence after such a statement is not weakness, it's trauma response. It's the body freezing in the face of an emotional blow. Not everyone lashes out. Some shut down. Some walk away. Harry walked away. In choosing not to respond, in leaving the coronation early, in avoiding further contact, he may have made the only choice that ensured his own peace, even if it left more questions in its wake. And what lingers now? A question that neither prince has answered. Is there a road back? William's words suggest finality. A door closed. A judgment passed. But the very pain they convey also betrays a flicker of feeling. You don't say something so pointed unless part of you still cares. Unless part of you still mourns the loss. Harry's silence, too, is not entirely absence. It's presence through restraint. It's a man still carrying the weight of a family that shaped him, scarred him, and still, on some level, defines him. In the next scene, we'll rewind the clock and trace the slow, quiet journey from brotherhood to heartbreak. How did two boys, once united in grief, end up on opposite sides of a coronation? What small steps, decisions, and silences brought them to this breaking point? And could anything at all, have changed the outcome? Their story began with shared footsteps behind a coffin, and it now unfolds with silent stares across royal chambers. The transformation of Prince William and Prince Harry from inseparable allies into distant strangers didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual unraveling, a slow drift powered by duty, heartbreak, love, resentment, and ultimately, incompatible visions of identity. Scene by scene, year by year, their bond frayed, not from a single explosive incident, but from 1,000 tiny cuts, many of them inflicted not with malice, but with misunderstanding and silence. The first signs of tension were subtle, almost imperceptible to outsiders. In their early adulthood, the brothers remained visibly close. They were seen joking at military events, supporting each other at public engagements, and speaking of each other with warmth in rare interviews. William had started dating Kate Middleton, a relationship that would eventually define his future as a stable royal. Harry, meanwhile, leaned into the military, joining the British Army and finding, for a time, both purpose and escape in service. In those years, their roles seemed harmonized. William the future king, embodying composure and tradition. Harry the loyal wingman, full of charisma and impulsive energy. But even then, their life trajectories were beginning to diverge. William's path was clear. His duty, inherited and inescapable, came with structure and deference. Every move was rehearsed, every future moment already outlined by the monarchy's expectations. For Harry, the future was uncertain and undefined. He had more freedom but less guidance, more attention but fewer rules, and increasingly, less belonging. Their first visible fissure emerged in 2017, during a BBC interview in which Harry described how he and William rarely spoke about their mother. While the world read this as a sign of vulnerability, insiders saw it differently, a glimpse into their emotional disconnect. William, ever reserved, had compartmentalized Diana's loss. Harry, aching with unresolved grief, wanted to revisit it. Even in how they mourned, the differences had started to matter. But it wasn't until Meghan Markle entered the picture that the rift became undeniable. Harry met Meghan in 2016, and the relationship moved swiftly. By 2017, they were engaged. And here lies one of the most controversial turning points in their timeline. William's reported warning. It has been claimed by multiple sources that William told Harry to take things slow, voicing concerns not about Meghan personally, but about the pace of the relationship. Harry, however, interpreted this as condescension, even veiled disapproval. For a man who had grown up constantly measured against his brother, Harry likely heard more than caution in those words. He heard doubt, a lack of support, perhaps even jealousy. Whether William meant it as brotherly advice or institutional prudence, the result was the same. Harry pulled away. Tensions began to grow around wedding preparations. Staff at Kensington Palace were reportedly stressed. Rumors began to circulate that Meghan and Kate had fallen out. There were stories about bridesmaid dresses in tears. Some painted Meghan as the aggressor, others claimed Kate was cold. The truth, as with most palace tales, probably lies somewhere in between. But what was certain was that the couples, once dubbed the Fab Four, were no longer operating in harmony. By early 2019, the separation became logistical. Harry and Meghan announced that they would be splitting households from William and Kate. They moved out of Kensington Palace and into Frogmore Cottage. On paper, this was simply practical. In reality, it was emotional distance made architectural. The brothers were no longer working side by side. Their interactions became increasingly rare and strained. The press noticed. The public speculated. But the real chasm remained private, growing quietly beneath the surface. Then came the seismic shift, January 2020. Harry and Meghan announced they were stepping back from their roles as senior royals. The statement, issued without prior coordination with the palace, shocked the world and, reportedly, the family. William was said to be blindsided, learning of the decision alongside the rest of the country. The so-called Sandringham Summit was convened to negotiate the terms of Harry and Meghan's departure. Charles, William, and Harry met behind closed doors. It was during this meeting, sources claim, that the distance between the brothers became unbridgeable. What was once disagreement turned to distrust. William, ever the defender of the institution, could not understand Harry's urgency to flee. Harry, who felt suffocated by the palace and hunted by the press, could not understand his brother's stoicism. In the aftermath, the brothers barely spoke. Then, in March 2021, came the interview that deepened the divide permanently, Harry and Meghan's sit-down with Oprah Winfrey. In it, they spoke of isolation, racism, suicidal ideation, and abandonment. They accused the royal family of failing to protect them and even hinted that a family member had speculated about the skin color of their unborn child. To William, this wasn't just a betrayal. It was an ambush. His family's name was being dismantled in front of an international audience, and he was given no opportunity to respond. The stoic silence that had once held the monarchy together was being dismantled by a brother he once trusted to uphold it. Days later, William, while attending a public event, was asked by a reporter, "Is the royal family a racist family?" His answer, while brief, was pointed. "We are very much not a racist family." It was the first time in years William had responded so directly to a controversy. It was also one of the few moments he broke his media silence. Because this time, the wound was too deep, and the accusation too personal. From that moment on, reconciliation became a distant dream. In 2022, the Netflix docuseries Harry and Meghan reignited the flames. The couple shared intimate photos, private texts, and commentary about the failures of the institution. William was mentioned only sparingly, but every reference was soaked in disappointment. He had, according to Harry, aligned with the crown. He had protected the institution instead of his brother. For William, this was more than creative editing. It was character assassination dressed in glossy footage. Then came Spare, Harry's memoir, released in January 2023. Its pages were filled with bombshells. Harry described physical altercations with William. He detailed private conversations, shared deeply personal anecdotes, and painted a picture of a brother who had become a stranger. He called William his beloved brother and arch-nemesis. A line that encapsulated their tangled history with painful clarity. But perhaps more than any single revelation, what made Spare so damaging was its tone. It didn't simply explain the rift, it justified it. It was Harry's final declaration that he had moved on, and that the bridge he had once hoped to rebuild had now been scorched. The death of Queen Elizabeth II in September 2022 offered a brief window for hope. The brothers were seen together during the public mourning period. They walked behind their grandmother's coffin, as they had behind their mother's 25 years earlier. The symbolism was impossible to miss. But that was all it was, symbolism. There were no meaningful conversations, no resolutions, just coordinated appearances managed by royal aides to Project Calm. When King Charles announced the date for his coronation, it became the next testing ground. Would Harry attend? Would Meghan? Would the brothers meet? Harry attended alone. Meghan stayed in California. The message was clear. This was an obligation, not a reunion. By the time the coronation arrived, the rift was no longer private or speculative. It was codified into every schedule, seating chart, and media narrative. The moment William uttered the sentence, "We buried Diana, but you buried us," it was not the opening of a wound. It was the confirmation of one. A wound that had bled slowly over time. Through misunderstandings and mistrust. Through different responses to grief. Through marriages, births, headlines, departures, and silences. It was not about a single fight or a single choice. It was about the weight of too many unresolved moments, too many missed opportunities, too much pain passed off as protocol. In the next scene, we'll explore a shadow that looms larger than any coronation, any interview, any argument, the memory of Princess Diana. How has her absence become both a point of connection and division between the brothers? And is it possible that the very woman who once united them in grief now stands as the ghost between them? There is no name more haunting in the saga of Prince William and Prince Harry than that of their mother, Diana, Princess of Wales. Her life, her love, and her loss are the gravitational forces that continue to pull and tear at her sons from opposite sides of the royal orbit. More than 2 decades after her tragic death, she remains the emotional centerpiece of both men's lives. But where she once bound them together in shared trauma and protection, her legacy has increasingly become a wedge. Diana, in death, has not only become a memory. She has become a battlefield. It was inevitable, in a sense. When someone dies young and beautiful, when they leave behind both public adoration and private tragedy, they become myth. For the world, Diana became a symbol of elegance, of rebellion, of compassion, of suffering. For William and Harry, she was far more complicated. She was their mother, their protector, their emotional compass in a world that often demanded stoicism.